I believe in a very practical approach when we talk about teaching, when we talk about studying in seminary. There was a great book written by a man by the name of J. Herbert Kane. It was called Life and Work on the Mission Field. I almost required that as a second textbook. Uh, if you're seriously looking at missions, if you're seriously looking at serving overseas, this is a book that you need to put into your library. You need to refer to it. You need to check it out. You need to read it. It's a great book. Highly recommend it. Most missionaries that I know are at least familiar with this book if they don't own a copy of it. I understand it's a little dated. I understand that some of the things that it talks about may not exactly apply in today's world, but still there's a lot of issues that it exposes that need to be talked about. So we're going to talk about some of these things from a practical standpoint. So first, let's talk about culture shock. Now, I understand there's a lot of people who think that culture shock isn't real. It's almost like a captain of a ship who says to those voyagers, there's no such thing as seasickness. It is what it is. It's the rhythm of the sea. Beloved, let me tell you, if you've ever been on board ship and you've seen someone so nauseated, okay, that they cannot control it, trust me, they're going to tell you that seasickness is real. Now, when we talk about culture shock, I need to explain that it is not when you first step off of the plane. It is not on your first little visit. You can visit the field 10 times and stay for 2 weeks and never experience true culture shock. Culture shock is real. It is coming to grips with being in an environment that is completely foreign to everything you know. Let me share with you a few things that will be seemingly innocuous by themselves, but added together, it becomes culture shock. For example, moving to Uganda. Well, Uganda was once a British Empire. So they drive on the left side of the road, which means all of the cars have the steering wheel on the other side, which means if you're driving a car with a clutch, the clutch is still with your left foot. But instead of shifting gears with your right hand, you now shift gears with your left hand. Turn signals. What would be a turn signal for us on the left-hand side is now on the right-hand side of the steering wheel. The windshield wipers, which are typically on the right-hand side of the steering wheel, are on the left-hand side of the steering wheel. So driving is different. At first, the novelty of it, you're kind of excited, you just kind of go with it. But then it sets in, this is the way that it is. The idea that you have a need, you just jump in the car and go to the store and buy what you need. Well, on a lot of mission fields, you can't do that. You're asking for things that are commonplace in America, but they are highly unusual over there. Even a trip to the store, the market, instead of it being in a clean environment, wrapped in a sterile environment, has an expiration date on it. You're going to find going to the grocery store or going to the open market where they've butchered the meat and hang it up in the open air and 105-degree temperature. It's all culture shock. After about a month, 6 weeks, when you realize this is your new reality, that's when culture shock begins to take place. Let me share with you some things, factors related to culture shock. First of all, the climate. When I first moved to Uganda, the equator runs through Uganda. Now, I am just north of the equator, but still, there is a difference. The temperature up in Moyo, Uganda, doesn't change 40 degrees all year. From their coldest winter to their hottest summer, it's still only about a 40-degree change. And that's different. My body had to become climatized, which means I had to adapt to the constant heat. They would say to me, "Oh, Pastor, it's going to get down very cold tonight. You need a wool blanket." And I would say, "It's 80 degrees. I do not need a wool blanket." And they would say, "Oh, very, very cold." "Yes, very cold." No, it's not cold. It is 80 degrees. It is hot. So living in that environment, and it gets to be 110 in the daytime or 105, you say, "Oh, this is an unbearable heat." Well, there's no escaping it. It is what it is. That's a factor that relates to culture shock. To see the abject poverty in certain areas where you'll go in and you'll find even the farmers are just sustenance farmers. They're trying to grow enough to feed their family, and they can't make ends meet. There's not enough. That brings you to hunger. Seeing so much hunger and so much poverty, and the need is so great, you are oftentimes overwhelmed. It is not like driving through the ghetto in your local town and you say, "Oh, I feel bad for these people." It is being in there day in, day out, seeing hunger take people's lives every day. When you begin to see the diseases, for example, in Uganda, there are still people who have polio. There is still active leprosy there. There is yellow fever, tuberculosis, malaria, cholera, dysentery, jaundice, things that we don't normally see here, but you see them everyday, commonplace there. Now I want you to listen to me very carefully. Any one of these factors in and of itself, your mind can hopefully deal with. But when they're all together, it becomes something more. Having to deal with the language. For example, I'm going to say 2 different words for you, and I'm going to say them in the Madi language. I want you to listen very carefully. There is au and au. I'm going to say them again. Au, au. Au, au. Now, those are 2 words. One means a chicken. The other means my aunt. So if you're going into town and you're looking for au, don't ask for au. you need to ask for Au, not Au. Because they'll say, I don't know your aunt. And you say, no, I'm looking for chicken. So it begins to be a little different. Strange customs. For example, in Uganda, every single woman, unmarried woman, when she addresses an adult, she has to curtsy. Every woman who is speaking to an adult has to curtsy. That's their custom. A married woman, if it is an important function, has to sit at her husband's feet. That's their custom. Now, why is this important for me to bring up these strange customs? Understand when you move over there that everything is totally different. The climate, the poverty, the hunger, disease, the language, the strange customs that they have. And it all begins to have this big weight, it seems like, of you adapting to culture shock. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this. Men and women adapt to these things differently based on their life situation. For example, if the husband is out and he is a teacher at a seminary, or he's a pastor, or he looks at culture shock through the eyes of how can I minister. A wife or a mother looks at these same issues differently. How can I take care of my children? How can I keep them from hunger? How can I keep them from disease? How can I best communicate with the language in case of emergency? How are we going to deal with these strange customs? How do I explain it to my child that this is a cultural thing? It is not a thing that you see in America. That is simply the way they do things there. Dress code is different. How do I explain that to my children? So culture shock is a real deal. Okay? And you need to understand how these 7 factors are going to relate. When you realize that this is not a trip that's going to end in 2 weeks, this is my new way of life, that's when culture shock sinks in. Now, what happens if you don't deal with culture shock? Okay? If you don't learn to deal with it in a proper way, you're going to lose that desire to serve the Lord. You're going to say, this is too difficult. I can't deal with it. I can't manage my family. I don't know what kind of milk I'm buying at the store. Is it cow milk? Is it goat milk? You know, I don't understand how to tell the difference. I don't know, where I can find medicine. I can't speak the language. I can't tell them, I think my son has a sinus infection. There isn't any doctors around. I don't know what the word antibiotic means over here. All those things, if you don't learn to deal with it, with culture shock, then you're going to have that. There's going to be that loss of witness. You would be surprised how many people get so overwhelmed that they lose their witness. They turn to alcohol or something else. They lose their temper. They begin to yell. They begin to mistreat the locals, the nationals, and it comes out as a bad witness, a bad testimony, and then, of course, you've lost your ministry. And you are worthless on the mission field at that point. So you need to understand that it's real. You need to be prepared for it when it happens, and you need to be able to work through it. Now, there are some areas of adjustment in the social environment that you will need to work through. For example, the law of hospitality. In Ireland, for example, it is almost offensive if someone comes to visit you and you don't invite them in for tea. I remember going to Ireland, and we were doing a mission trip, and we were going in a IRA area. And I don't know how many cups of tea we had to drink to try to make it through this neighborhood, because that was the law of hospitality. And you have to be hospitable. In Uganda, if you go and visit with a group of people, then there is a social protocol, and you have to understand if they offer you a meal that you have to eat with them. That's just part of it. And beloved, since they have no concept of what your dietary preferences are in America, they will offer you the very best that they have. Whether it's fish head soup, or it's some concoction of rice and goat innards, or dodo, or posho, or whatever. You have to learn what those laws of hospitality are in that country. Segregation of the sexes. In some places you go to, they have the men and women set separately. You'll see them in different areas. They may have different customs. The one I've already suggested or mentioned to you is a woman sits at her husband's feet. It is not a sign of her value. Not at all. It is a sign that she understands she is the wife and mother. And it is actually a position that is elevated in their society. For example, I know a member of parliament, a lady member of parliament. Her husband is a simple farmer there in the village. Now, she has been sent to Kampala to serve in parliament, to serve in the government. When she comes back, and there is a meeting of the clan or the tribe or the government, she pulls out the marriage mat, she rolls it at this farmer's feet, and she takes her position and sits there. Now, that's their culture. I have no right to impose the American Western culture on them, and I have no right to tell them that that's wrong. That is simply their culture. Stratification of society. In India, this is a big deal. They have a caste system, and if you're born in one caste, you're never going to leave that caste. That's just the way that it is. People relate to you differently. In Africa, for example, the Maasai, that's a cattle herding tribe. And they will water their cows, and they will, go to a dam, and they will dip water, and they will pour it in a trough, and the trough will run down into a larger area so they can water more cows at one time. If that thing breaks, they won't fix it. They think that they are cattlemen, and to work in clay and mud is beneath them. They'll hire somebody else to do it. The practice of propriety. What is right and what is not right. For example, in Uganda. In Uganda, ladies up in the north among the Mahdi, ladies wear dresses. Because for them not to, it seems improper. So, ladies wear dresses. When I take a team up there, I tell them, ladies, you must wear dresses or they will talk bad about you. They will think that you are a loose woman. So, it is their culture. It is what they think is appropriate. You have to adapt to that. The practice of talking price. A lot of Arab countries, part of buying and selling is the haggling over the price. And for you to just pay the first price that they give, they would take as an insult, because haggling or debating the price is part of the whole buying and selling process, and you've just diverted it. There's also the role of the middleman. This is the go-between. This is a very proper thing, a very British thing. For example, in Uganda, they have the Master of Ceremonies. The Master of Ceremonies is really an important job, because the least important person speaks first, building up to the most important person. So there is an order. And if somebody shows up who is more important or less important, then the speaking order has to immediately change because of that. So you have to understand the role of this middleman or the Master of Ceremonies. You have to understand how this works. You'll also have to learn about things like what is loss of face. Basically, that means someone gets embarrassed. You have done something offensive, either a gesture or the way you've gone about it. It seems improper. So you have to learn those areas of society and how to operate within them so that no one loses face. Here's another adjustment. No sense of time. In the African mind, they are event-oriented, not time-oriented. The event is what is important. For example, on Sunday, the event for those Christians is church. You say, what time does it start? They wouldn't know what you're talking about. People congregate at the church, they begin to sing. They may sing for an hour. They may sing for 2 hours. They may sing for 3 hours. And once they think everybody is there, then the preaching will start. And then they may preach for 1 hour. They may have 2 preachers and go for 2 hours. They may have 3 people and go for 3 hours. Then they may break for lunch and come back and start it all over again. It is not a set your watch kind of service. They are event-oriented. If you hire somebody to do some work for you and you say, be there first thing on Monday morning, that means sometime before afternoon. Whenever that is. It could be 6 o'clock in the morning. It could be 11:45. because they have no sense of time, because they are event-oriented. If you're a person who is so driven by the clock, by the watch, I'm going to do this at 9, I'm going to do that at 12, I'm going to do this at 3, I'm going to do that, then you're going to drive yourself crazy. That's just culture shock. They have no sense of timing the way that we have sense of timing. So these are the areas of adjustment in the social environment that you're going to have to deal with when you get on the field. But there's also areas of adjustment in the religious environment. For example, confronting non-Christian religions. You're going to do that. You're going to, on the mission field, you're going to run into those non-Christian religions. Doesn't matter what country you're in. Doesn't matter whether it's Islam or animism or Taoism or Confucianism, Buddhism, all those other isms. In religious life, how are you going to confront them? What are the acceptable ways? And I'm talking about with the government and with society. And what are unacceptable ways? Okay? That's a struggle that you're going to have to learn to deal with. Okay? Religion in everyday life. Sometimes this is subtle, sometimes it's not. I'll give you an example. I was up in northern Uganda. I was very close to the border. And we were teaching. And I happened to ask the question, who in the village was the butcher? And they said, oh, the Muslims are the butchers. And I said, why is that? And they said, because they believe they're the only ones who have the right to kill an animal. And I said, okay. So is there a law that says you have to take your goats to the Muslims to butcher? And they said, no. I said, so why do you do it? They said, well, because Muslims kill things. That's what Muslims do. And I said, I understand that. But they believe that they're the only ones who have the right to do so. What is a Christian supposed to do? Can you butcher your own? And they said, well, if we knew how, we could. So I taught them how to butcher goats. So you're going to have to deal with these religious questions, religion in everyday life. Even among some of the city administrators up in Moyo District, I had to answer the question, what gave me the right to be able to butcher animals? And I said, there is nothing religious about butchering a goat. We are not sacrificing it to any god. We are not paying any, spiritual thing. It is simply a matter of eating. Someone had to do it, and we did it. So you're going to have to learn to deal with those things. Cooperation with the national church. If you plant a church, is it going to associate with anybody else? Is it going to associate with other Baptist churches? Is there a National Baptist Convention in that country? How are you going to cooperate? And then how are you going to adjust to what is called institutional life? Okay? You want to start a school. That's great. That's wonderful. You should. But how are you going to do that if they're not time oriented? If you can't say we're going to have a 50-minute class and change classes, every hour and give you a 10-minute break, but they don't run on time, how are you going to adjust to that? How are you going to build that in? Your worship service, are you going to teach them that now, in order to be a good Christian, everybody has to go out and buy a clock or a watch so they can be a slave to time? Or are you going to adjust your institutional life, even in worship, that it begins when it begins and it ends when it's over? And the amount of time is not the important thing. The amount of time is determined by what happens there. And it becomes a true worship experience. See, all of these areas of adjustment, you're going to have to adjust when you get to the mission field. You're going to have to be prepared. Remember, you are not called to carry the American culture to the world. You are called to carry Christ to the world. And there's a difference. The two are not the same. We'll talk more about that tomorrow.